Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. When the day comes that Shador Sanders gets to start a game at quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, I think I'm going to be excited. And so will most of the fan base. Now, the reason for the excitement is for a number of reasons. But one of those reasons is because we will finally get to unwrap what is one of the biggest mysteries of the entire 2025 draft class. Because that's really what Shedeur is at this point. He's a giant mystery. We don't know what Shedeur is. There's a lot of people with some strong opinions on either angle of it about Shedeur, but we really don't know. He truly is a mystery at this point. And it's not just because he plays quarterback, a position where people will hold out hope because it's so rare to find an answer. You just got to be hopeful that maybe you lucked out and you got one. But also because of everything that has surrounded Shedeur since the draft has added so much more mystery than would be there for the average fifth round or day 3 selection. The draft slide created a lot of questions, a lot of debate, a lot of argument about Shedeur. It's been one of the largest sports talk topics of the season, despite Shedeur not playing in any games so far in the regular season. And I think the reason to this is because at the core of the conversation, people want to know the truth of the nature of his draft side. There seems to be 2 predominant sides to this argument, although these aren't the only 2 takes you can have. Both of these takes aren't takes that I subscribe to, but both of these takes kind of summarize where each part of the conversation is. There's one side to this argument that thinks that Shedeur was a great prospect who, maybe he had a little bit of swagger coming in, a lot of pull because he's really famous and his father, and the NFL saw all of that and wanted to humble him and then force teams to not take him as early as he would have been taken. He is essentially a temporarily embarrassed first round pick for all intents and purposes for the people who kind of subscribe to this brand of argument about Shedeur. The other argument that seems to be out there in the mainstream is that Shedeur is some overrated Nepo baby who was propelled to the first round status just by the media alone. And the reason he was propelled to first round status is because his father is Deion Sanders. That seems to be another prevailing kind of theory out there. I will contend that both of these arguments will eventually prove themselves to be wrong. Maybe one day I'll do a whole video on it. I don't really have time in this video to go and explain it because that's like a 20-30 minute explanation. But the condensed version of this is no. In my opinion, Shedeur isn't being conspired against with the NFL. I don't think the NFL is forcing somebody who would have otherwise been a first round pick to be a fifth round pick. And I think there is some truth to him being a more flawed prospect than the major media outlets were making him up to be. By the time we got to the draft, I wasn't the only person pointing out that Shedeur going in the top 5 like Mel Kiper and all these other guys had was definitely not gonna happen. Like, I wasn't the only one saying this. There were a lot of other people who thought that would be the case. I know people use his status on some of these mainstream big boards as a justification or evidence to the NFL kind of forcing him not to go in the first, second, or third round. But I don't think that's really reflective of what people who actually were paying attention were thinking at that time. Like, Shedeur wasn't universally a top 10 pick in a lot of people's eyes. A lot of people thought that he was a reach at the top 10. A lot of people thought that quarterback in general was a reach at the top 10 of this draft class. I certainly subscribe to that theory during the draft. I had plenty of videos talking about how I felt like there wasn't a quarterback that you should take in the top 10 of this draft. So the idea that it's like only could be conspiracy that could answer why Shedeur didn't go in the top 10 or in the first round, I find that to be ridiculous. There's a lot that can explain why Shedeur didn't go in the top 10 or even in the first round. I thought that him falling out of the first round was a real possibility by the time that we got to the draft, and that's before the draft even happened. But on the other hand, this notion that he's this overrated Nepo baby who's never done anything is also kind of ridiculous, right? Like, he has the film and the traits of a quarterback that typically goes in day 2 of the draft. I think that is as fair of a thing that you could say about Shedeur, right? That he has the same film and the same traits of any quarterback who's ever gone day 2 in the draft, right? You could look at the quarterbacks that did go in day 2 of the draft. I think his tape and his film and his traits are on par with every quarterback, including Dylan Gabriel, that went in day 2, right? You could say it's on par with Tyler Shuck and whoever else went in the second round this year or in the third round this year. So the idea that Shedeur was always going to be a 5th round pick and that his talent said he was going to be a 5th round pick and that people are freaking out over nothing and he was only overrated to be a potential late first to day 2 pick at quarterback because he was a Sanders family guy is kind of ridiculous as well. And I think that's why this conversation gets messy, right? There is actual football reason to justify part of the slide for Shador Sanders, but there you do get to a point to where the football, the tape, it doesn't explain why he fell all the way to the 5th round. I think the reason he fell from day 2 to day 3 is probably because of, one, his large media profile, which teams get really uncomfortable with when they're not going to make you the starter right away, and 2, the fact that there was some wariness about the ecosystem in which he grew up in as a football player, right? The fact that Dion kind of curated and picked together his entire football ecosystem since he was 12 years old definitely made a lot of NFL teams uncomfortable, given that they're not going to be in the Deion Sanders curated system anymore. So maybe his tape could be propped up by what was his father putting him in the absolute best case scenario at all times, which is just not going to happen for any team in the NFL, especially when you're not drafted in the first round. Since there is credible mystery to why Shedeur fell all the way to the 5th, and since there is credibility to why he fell out the first round, it creates this situation where both of the more extreme sides of this argument feel emboldened to kind of say whatever they want, with especially there not being Shedeur games in the NFL to evaluate, which has made this situation very, very messy. And I think that sets the ground for why the conversation about Shador Sanders always feels a bit irrational, a bit unhinged, and conspiracy filled. But before I get into that, I want to thank my sponsor for today, Sleeper. Real quick, just want to let you guys know Sleeper has a new offer here. They're offering a free $20 entry, no deposit required. And also, if you're a first-time user, you also will receive a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code WORSTTAKE. Again, $20 free, no deposit required. Plus, first-time users also receive a 100% deposit match up to $100. Join Sleeper. So to summarize my point, is Shedeur a temporarily embarrassed top 5 pick? No, I don't think he is. We don't know for sure until we see him play. But I think there's a reason why teams looked at him on the field with his tape and said, I'll pass on this in the top 10. I could even justify it in the top 20 or in the first round entirely. I don't think you have to resort to conspiracy to explain why Shedeur fell out the first round. I think there are a lot of explanations that can get you to why the Shedeur fell out the first round, whether it be concerns about his overall athletic ability, being able to translate since he didn't really look that fast in a Big 12 conference that's not necessarily the best in college football, whether it could be concerns about the fact that he never had a big college win under his belt as a quarterback at Colorado or even at Jackson State. He lost both Celebration Bowls he played in. He also did not win a single big time college game against a top tier ranked opponent. Every time he did not look great. You could also add in some of the mechanical stuff that bothered people, right? The pocket stuff that bothered people, and especially the pocket drifting and the bad pocket mechanics that would scare a team off of him, especially when he's not a dynamic athlete and his arm strength is good, but it's not necessarily mind-boggling like Cam Ward's was in that draft class. It makes sense he fell out the first round, but I don't think he's some kind of temporarily embarrassed top 5 pick. I don't know if that's the case. Maybe he goes out there and he plays to a level to where I have to reevaluate it, but I don't feel like that's the case. The same is with the latter argument, right? Is he this overrated Johnny Manziel type player? I highly doubt that's true. There's nothing about him that screams Johnny Manziel other than the fact that he came from money, like Johnny Manziel came from money. Other than that, these are two completely different scenarios, completely different players who found success in two completely different ways. Shedor's tape does not resemble a player who seems like they come to film study hung over and not caring about progressions. Shedeur seems to be a hard worker and a studier and all of those things. So I would not assume that this is some kind of Johnny Manziel. I find that one to be a little bit even more ridiculous than the temporarily embarrassed top 5 pick if you're asking me for my money. Ultimately, I don't know, and I won't know until he plays. And that brings me to the second reason I'm going to be really excited to see Shedeur. It's going to introduce some observable reality into a conversation that desperately needs some observable reality because it's been overrun with conspiracy theory. It's been overrun with ignorance and misinformation to the point to where it just feels gross to talk about it in general. Nobody you argue with about Shador Sanders, whether they are pro him or against him, is working from the same set of facts at any given time, right? Everybody has their own set of facts when they're arguing about Shador Sanders, whether they're against him or with him. It is an exhausting conversation to have when we don't have any observable reality with him in the NFL to be able to really judge things off of. Should Shedeur have gotten first team reps? I don't know. Nothing really indicates that he should, but I haven't really seen enough of him. Should Shedeur be the starter right now? I don't know. There's really no observable reality that I can evaluate that would tell me that he's a guy who should be starting in the NFL right now, right? Like we are all just kind of assuming or making up shit or just kind of vibing out with this conversation. And it's gotten to the point to where any conversation about Shedeur, despite the fact that Shedeur himself is extremely likable, ends up being very, very ugly and gross. What also does not help Shedeur Sanders right now is that he has become a piece of fuel in a larger media machine's conversation, which I don't think is ultimately the best thing for Shedeur in the long run. I want to make a point here because whenever I make a point about like kind of the media circus around Shedeur, people think I'm including like Twitter accounts or YouTube channels. I'm not talking about that. That stuff's just the internet. It's not really on a large enough platform to really affect things. I'm talking about people who have, whether you agree with them having it or not, but people who have a lot of sway over the larger sports talk conversation and the platforms that have a lot of power over the conversation, right? Individuals like Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp, corporations like ESPN and Fox Sports, right? Like That's more of where this criticism is pointed towards, the larger media entities that affect the conversation that we're having. And some of these entities or personalities have taken up advocacy for him. But what I see when they talk about Shedeur is them using him as a convenient vehicle for content, because none of this stuff feels like advocacy for Shedeur. It all feels like stuff that's ultimately not going to be good for him in the long run. You know, when you're starting these controversies about Shedeur after the draft slide, about practice reps, about scout team reps, constantly making more of quotes from other players than what's really intended. And now I think the new controversy is that he's not getting first team reps as the backup quarterback when Dylan is also a rookie quarterback. The constant cries of conspiracy in reaction to Shedeur living the common reality of a 5th round pick is really rubbing a lot of folks who would otherwise be in Shedeur's corner to be a lot more skeptical of Shedeur, or expect a lot more of Shedeur a lot sooner than what they might have had before. Right? Basically, a lot of folks in the media, without the consent of Shador Sanders, are really spending a lot of his public goodwill on controversies about dumb shit. And it's really just expending the patience of a lot of people. A lot of people are just exhausted with the whole Shedeur conversation. I know people who are Browns fans who are excited when the Browns drafted Shedeur, who want the Browns to just trade Shedeur because they're tired of the larger conversation around him always being focused on the team. Again, the Browns were front page news this week because they were giving their starting quarterback all the first team reps when he's a rookie. This is ridiculous. The amount of things that have been controversial that I've had to sit here and argue about, not being a team that's sabotaging somebody, but just the common reality of a quarterback taken in the 5th round. The amount of times that I have to have arguments about this stuff when we know it's very common, when we see 5th round quarterbacks selected that go through the same reality and it doesn't get televised. A lot of people are not going to be dumb enough to think that, oh, because Shannon Sharpe is bringing it up, it's a big deal. A lot of people are going to look at that and go, why are we making a big deal out of that? Even if they don't trust the organization, even if they don't trust Andrew Berry, even if they don't trust Kevin Stefanski, they're going to look at what you're mad about and say, well, that's not really enough, right? It's not just that you're asking an entire fan base to think that their team is conspiring against a guy that they drafted for whatever reason, but it's the arguments you're using to try to convince people are just insultingly dumb, right? Like, to the point to where it's like, why am I wasting time arguing about this and acting like this could be legitimate when it's obvious on the surface of it? This is just the reality of somebody who was drafted in the 5th round to play quarterback. And maybe that's the problem. That's the disconnect. A lot of folks have not really coped with what that means, that Shedeur fell in the 5th round and what his battle is going to be. But treating him like a temporarily embarrassed 1st round pick is not gonna help him in this situation, right? What this is gonna do, and what my fear is that all of this media attention has done, has worn out the patience for people with Shedeur before he's even gotten on the field. And let's face it, he is a rookie quarterback. Even if you thought he was a great prospect, he's a rookie quarterback. And sometimes, oftentimes, most of the times, almost 90% of the time, a rookie quarterback is going to require a lot of patience from the fan base, from the coaching staff, from the people in the building to get to where they need to get to. Oftentimes, the question of quarterback development is more about how much patience can a quarterback create about themselves to get to the point to where they actually develop, right? That's why a lot of people argue for having a high floor for a rookie quarterback, much like what happened with Brock Purdy, where, hey, look, you can get through his woes as a rookie quarterback, or the same thing would happen with Jalen Hurts, where you have a high enough floor as a football football team to where you can have a lot of patience and let him play through a lot of this stuff. And then eventually he's going to get enough experience to where he's going to be good. The quarterback position is a long game that requires a lot of patience when it comes to developing it. And when you have expelled this amount of patience for a young player, when in order to justify that young player going out, you're saying that you only need 3 or 4 games to look at another rookie quarterback to know the deal, you're also tying the hands of the guy that you're quote unquote advocating for. Because if you're telling me it's okay to write the book on Dylan Gabriel and say that he's done after 4 or 5 starts that don't look amazing, you're also saying that the same is acceptable for Shador Sanders. And what happens if Shedeur isn't amazing right away? What happens if Shedeur struggles quite a bit right away? People have already lost their patience because instead of forgetting about their 5th round rookie quarterback like most teams and fan bases do, they have spent all year arguing about this guy because he hasn't gotten practice reps or he didn't get the scout team reps, just silly little controversies that get made up every week about him, to the point to where people already want him traded just because they're tired of it. They're not going to have weeks of patience of bad play for that guy. So the second he doesn't look great, everybody's going to want to be done with this dude. And I don't think that's fair to Shedeur. I don't think that's the best way for him to develop. And I think that's a recipe for his career to go off the tracks when I do think he can eventually be an NFL quarterback if given the right development situation. But I don't think that people are allowing for enough patience for that to happen. And then I ask this question. If that does happen, if Shedeur does struggle early on, and maybe he struggles for more than 3-4 weeks, maybe he throws a lot of interceptions, are the same people who are quote unquote advocates for Shedeur in the media, the Shannon Sharps, the Skip Baylesses, the Ocho Cincos of the world, are those people going to stick with Shedeur at that point, or are they going to move on to the next piece of content that they have on the docket? I'm sure that they will support Shedeur behind the scenes and send him very encouraging texts if they have his number. All of that stuff kind of relates to Deion. They have personal relationships with Deion. I'm sure personally they will support him, but will they be as loud about him in the media when they know it's not a winning case as far as content goes? Or will they move on to arguing about the next big thing that they want to argue about because that's going to get more content because the cat's out the bag with Shedeur? And then what does Shedeur do? All these people who have expended the public's patience with him all of a sudden have moved on to something else. And now Shedeur just has to be left dealing with that media environment all on his own. That's a super unfair position for him to be in, especially given that he has not endorsed any of this or, as far as I'm concerned, consented to any of this. I try to look at this as fair as possible for not Shedeur's fan base or not the anti-Shedeur fan base. I try to look at this and try to be as fair as possible as I can be to the human beings involved in this game, right? As much as I love the Cleveland Browns, I love football more than I love the Cleveland Browns. And I will use that love. That love makes me want to be fair to the people who play this game. Even if I don't, but I'm gonna be honest with you, I've done this enough times with enough quarterbacks and enough players to know that we are headed down a path where patience might be necessary and nobody's going to want to expend it. And that's so unfortunate for a rookie quarterback to be at that place. I hope I am catastrophically wrong. I hope Shedeur goes out there, he balls out, everybody has a bunch of patience for him, and he's able to develop, and he becomes the answer for the Cleveland Browns. I don't care who the quarterback is for the Browns. I just want the Browns to have a quarterback. So if it's Shedeur, cool, let's do it. We can move on to the 12 era and make this whole thing about getting him a Super Bowl ring. I would love nothing more than to talk about that. But my job isn't to hope as much as it is to tell you, given the information that I have and what I've seen and my perspective on it, what I think is possible. And that's my opinion. Let me know your opinion down below in the comment section. But y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.